Today, we will explore the dynamic life and story of famed African American author Donald Goines. A prolific writer of urban fiction, Donald was the only son and middle child to parents Joseph and Myrtle Goines, and brother to two sisters, Marie and Joan. Welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me in this episode of What Happened. Born in Chicago, Illinois on December 15, 1936, Donald and his family eventually settled in Detroit, Michigan, and established a life as middle-class Black Catholics. His father was of Native American heritage, and Mother Myrtle, whose father had led a jazz band in Little Rock, Arkansas, ran a successful dry cleaning business. At the time of his birth, his mother Myrtle was 27 years old, and his father Joseph was 50, a 23-year age difference between the two. His upbringing, by all measures, was considered one of privileges, and his family was one of the first to have a television in their home, a luxury that most households could not afford at the time. He excelled in school and was an excellent student who loved to play baseball and was considered a skilled pitcher. Occasionally, he and his sisters would help at the dry cleaning business, which his parents expected he would run someday. When his parents worked hard to keep their children on the right path, the hustle and bustle of the gritty streets of Detroit would eventually lend way to Donald's detour into the fast and dark world. As a freshman at Pershing High School, in 1951 he dropped out and at the age of 15 lied about his age to enlist into the United States Air Force, serving both in Japan and Korea. During his time in the Air Force, Donald grew an affinity for drugs and soon developed a strong heroin addiction. An addiction that continued long after he was honorably discharged from the military in the mid-1950s. To support his addiction, Donald committed multiple crimes including robbery and pimping, which would eventually land him in prison several times, doing both state and federal time. In 1955, he left Detroit to escape the threats from a rival pimp and moved to Kansas City, Missouri, and then later Junction City, Kansas. He spent 3 years in exile before returning home to Detroit in 1958. Upon his return, he was arrested and sentenced to 1 year in federal prison for robbing a numbers house. In the 1960s, he spent another year in prison for selling illegal hooch. While serving time at Michigan's Jackson Penitentiary, Donald embarked upon a career in writing urban street fiction. His style mimicked that of Robert Beck's aka Iceberg Slim novels, and his decision to write was solidified after reading Iceberg Slim's autobiography, Pimp, The Story of My Life. His novels detail the life of the gritty and dark Detroit world of gangsters, drug addicts, and sex workers. Though his first published novel in 1971 was Dope Fiend, The Story of a Black Junkie, his first written novel, Whoreson, which was somewhat autobiographical, was written while he was incarcerated and later published in 1972. It was the story of a son born to a prostitute whom she named Whoreson and would eventually teach how to be a pimp. Donald wrote several novels, some only taking a month to complete. It was rumored that he did so to make money to support his drug habit. His sister Joan, however, later refuted those rumors, claiming that her brother wrote at such an accelerated rate in order to avoid committing more crimes, and that many of the characters in his books were about people he knew in real life. He completed a total of 16 books on his journey to become a famed author. In 1974, Donald published a book titled Crime Partners, which was the first book in the Kenyatta series. The series was published under the pseudonym A.I.C. Clarke as to avoid the effects of sales by publishing too many books too quickly under the name Donald Goines. The book dealt with an anti-hero character named after Jomo Kenyatta that ran an organization similar to that of the Black Panthers. In his book, The Low Road, whom Eddie B. Allen authored about the life of Donald Goines, he remarked that the series was a departure from some of Donald's other works, with the character of Kenyatta symbolizing a sense of liberation for him. His final book, Inner City Hoodlum, was written and completed before his death and published posthumously in 1975. It was set in Los Angeles, detailing the life of heroin, money, and murder. On October 21, 1974, 36-year-old Donald Goines, along with his common-law wife, Shirley Saylor, were discovered dead in their Highland Park, Michigan apartment. At the time of the incident, it was reported that Donald was working and Shirley was making popcorn, while their two daughters, ages 4 and 2, were watching television. When the doorbell rang, Shirley answered and let two white men inside, which suggested she knew them, and as the girls watched, the men shot Goines, then Saylor, before fleeing the scene. After receiving an anonymous phone call, police responded to the Goines residence, and after they entered the apartment, discovered Donald's body in the living room and Shirley's in the kitchen. They both had sustained multiple gunshot wounds to the chest and head. Fortunately, their two young children were found alive in the basement. After an investigation, police determined that two gunmen were responsible for the homicides. However, the identity of the two men were never determined and remains unknown. The case sits unsolved in Detroit's cold case files. There were several theories as to the reason for the double homicide. Some believe that Donald's death was attributed to him characterizing real-life criminals that he knew into his books, while others believed his death was due to drug debts. At his funeral, a relative placed one of his books into the casket, but it was later stolen. Donald Goines was one of the most successful Black authors of all times, despite his untimely death. He lived his life on the mean streets of Detroit, then wrote about his experiences. 2 movies were made of his works in the early 2000s: Crime Partners, starring Ice-T and Snoop Dogg, and Never Die Alone, starring the late DMX. He exemplified the culture of his time and legitimized it through his writing. He will forever live in the hearts and minds of those who admired his work and will always be considered a cultural phenomenon, presenting to his readers riveting characters relatable to those who walked his walk. His books are as popular today as they've been, selling more than 200,000 copies each year. Though the life of Donald Goines was filled with many trials, the success of his famed novels has left a lasting legacy and can be enjoyed by his readers for generations. Thank you for tuning in to watch this episode of What Happened. Please like, comment, and share this video. For more stories and mysteries, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you can always be the first to know what happened. Until next time.